The next and final step is what has been called resolution, or what I like to call the negotiation phase. So we've already taken a look at how much do you owe. We've verified that. We are creating a plan to see what penalties could potentially be abated, and that just means forgiven. When we have that financial information, we are looking at the national standards that the IRS allows for your area. When we look at that, if the amount that you pay currently is lower than that, we're going to use that standard. You know why? Because you've teamed with a professional now that understands how the tax law works.
Welcome to the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens podcast. Are you behind on taxes? Is the IRS threatening you or your business? Are you overwhelmed and confused about how to resolve your tax issues? Let's join Timalyn as she explains your options and how she may be able to help. Timalyn Bowens is America's favorite EA.
Hey, family. I am back in the podcast studio for episode 9. I can't believe that it's been 9 episodes already. And if you haven't listened to the ones before this, feel free to pause this right now, go to the website and check out episodes 1 through 8. I promise you'll find value in there. But for right now, we're on episode 9, and I'm going to talk about tax relief. Because, sometimes as a tax professional, I get so caught up on all the tax language and law. I like to call it taxonese. And everybody doesn't speak taxonese. So even though this podcast is named Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens, I've had people approach me and say, what is tax relief? So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about what tax relief is and how you can get tax relief. Because let's be honest, taxes don't excite the everyday person the same way they excite me. You're either here because you find it kind of interesting and you want to stay out of tax trouble, or you have a tax issue right now. Now, of course, there are those of you that just love me, so you're tuning in. I appreciate you too. But I want to make sure that I'm very clear on what tax relief is and how it can benefit you. Okay? So first things first, what is tax relief? Tax relief is typically something that is going to be a government program to help provide or ease people into an arrangement where taxes can be forgiven or lowered. Now, if you're listening to this podcast right now, you survived the pandemic. Or we've survived, we're still coming out of the pandemic. During the pandemic, we saw various types of tax relief. They're called the coronavirus relief. We saw stimulus checks being issued for lower income taxpayers. We saw advanced child tax credit payments. These were all forms of tax relief. For businesses, we had PPP loans. We had the employer retention credit. These are all forms of tax relief. But the IRS also provides relief for individuals and businesses that can't pay their taxes in full. Have you ever heard of the Fresh Start program? The Fresh Start program was started within the past, I would say 15, maybe 20 years or so. And people still talk about it like it's a new program. But what it enabled taxpayers to do is to qualify for different tax relief programs that the IRS provides easier. What do I mean by this? The qualifications for different tax relief programs, it was a little hard to get into the mode where you could find relief and forgiveness. And that is what people really go for. I have people call and say, hey, I owe $115,000. Hey, I owe $185,000. Can you get this down to zero? Truth of the matter is, I don't know until I get into the financials. Well, 1 in 50 taxpayers has an IRS issue. What the Fresh Start program did, they made the amount of paperwork that you need to qualify for relief less. You can now qualify by applying online. If you owe $50,000 or less, you don't have to turn in financial information if you can get the taxes paid by a certain time. These are some of the things that the Fresh Start program has done. But let's go back to the question that I'm asked. Let's ask the question of yourself. How much do you owe the IRS right now? What is the least amount that you can afford to pay? Now, yes, we would all dream of being able to pay $0 in taxes, right? To just have that debt completely eliminated. You may not qualify for that. So let's talk about, how do you get tax relief? Well, true tax relief is accomplished in 3 different phases. A couple of episodes ago, I talked about a tax transcript. In phase number 1, we have the transcript investigation phase. Some people refer to it as investigation. When you look at the transcript, you're looking for the amount that you actually owe. You're looking to see how much tax was assessed. So this means what the IRS said you owed for a certain time period. And then you're looking at the different penalties and interests that have accumulated on that. When you look at the transcript, you may find some discrepancies. There may be things that you don't quite agree with because maybe there was an error on the IRS end. And guess what? That actually happens a lot. It may be something as simple as you providing the proof that what they have on record isn't accurate, and that eliminating your tax debt. But you wouldn't know if you don't do the investigation phase and look at your transcripts. When I work with a client to get tax relief and I do the investigation, these are some of the things that I'm looking at, as well as the different penalties, because then I can go back to the taxpayer and say, hey, what happened in this year when this penalty of 25% of your tax was assessed? And we could potentially be able to have that abated or forgiven by the IRS. But we have to have the foundation with the investigation first. The investigation also takes us right into the next phase of getting tax relief. If you don't file your taxes, the IRS isn't going to want to negotiate with you. That is a must. Now, I would say to start with the first 3 years. Sometimes the IRS says go back 6 years. They have the right. They could say you have to file more than that, but that hasn't been the case, what I've seen. And I've been in the industry now since 2011. For compliance, you must be filing your taxes, and typically they want you to be caught up on estimated tax payments. Now, let me just be truthful with you. If you owe taxes right now and you can't pay them today, truth of the matter is you probably don't have the money to pay estimated tax payments. But when working with a professional, well, I can actually only speak for myself because I've heard some stories. When somebody works with me and we're looking at the compliance piece, we want to make sure that you are in a position to begin paying your estimated tax payments, because guess what? If we get an arrangement set up for you and then you owe the next year, that's going to default the arrangement that we've made. So when you are working on the compliance and making sure that you have all of the estimated tax payments made, everything filed, I also look at your financial information so we can figure out what you can actually afford to pay the IRS monthly to go towards this debt and what you need to pay to make sure that you stay compliant and get those estimated tax payments in. Now, if you've been listening along with me before, you know that as a business owner, you have to make these estimated tax payments quarterly. If you are a wage earner, you're making these estimated tax payments each payday. You may need to adjust your withholding as a wage earner or if you're receiving Social Security or a pension right now. So the next and final step is what has been called resolution, or what I like to call the negotiation phase. So we've already taken a look at how much do you owe. We've verified that. We are creating a plan to see what penalties could potentially be abated, and that just means forgiven. When we have that financial information, we are looking at the national standards that the IRS allows for your area. When we look at that, if the amount that you pay currently is lower than that, we're going to use that standard. You know why? Because you've teamed with a professional now that understands how the tax law works. When we do this, it's the equivalent of when you file your tax return and you have a standard deduction. We're going to use that standard because it's what the IRS already allows us to use. Using this is using the tax law to work for us. Now, there are other things that could come into place, and I've created the back tax negotiation checklist, which you can find available at americasfavoriteea.com. What this does, it lists out everything that you need before you should go to the IRS and see if you can negotiate the terms of the debt that you have. And remember, for some people, that's going to be a payment plan that may be 36 months. As I mentioned before on previous episodes, if you owe $10,000 or less, you pay that in 36 months. Direct debit is better. The IRS is going to be like, cool beans. But if you're in a situation like a lot of my clients have been, and you're in that spot of 150,000 or more, they're going to want your financial information. They're going to want to know how much you pay in housing costs each month. They're going to want to know how much you pay in food for your car. So it's very important to understand where the standards, national standards that they will allow, will be more beneficial for you. So what tax relief do you qualify for is all going to depend on your personal situation. You can't really look at Billy Bob down the street and say, well, he was able to take his $100,000 debt. Now he only has to pay $10,000. What you may not know is you may actually make more money than Billy Bob. Maybe Billy Bob, his expectancy for how much longer he can work is different than yours. Maybe he has a terminal illness he hasn't told you about. Everyone's situation is going to be unique. So remember, if you are facing a back tax issue right now, you want to make sure that you are going through the phases in that order. You want to investigate and confirm how much you actually owe. You want to make sure that you are in tax compliance so you're in a position to even negotiate with the IRS. And then you want to prepare the paperwork that you need to turn into the IRS to show them you really can't afford to pay what they're asking you to pay, but you're willing to make payments on it. Now, as I mentioned before, taxes, they don't excite everybody the same way they do me. If you were taking your notes today and you're like, yeah, I need tax relief, I don't want them to take my passport, I don't want them to issue a lien on my home, I don't want them to take the money out of my bank account, but there is no way in the world that I can do all that. I want to invite you to visit my website and you can book a call with me. You can check out a webinar with me and we'll see if we're a good fit to work with each other. Because at the end of the day, your life shouldn't stop because of a tax issue. You all know I'm on my personal mission to fill the tax literacy gap, one taxpayer at a time. And I don't want you to have this issue. If we are a good fit to work with each other, I'd love to connect with you because back taxes, they shouldn't ruin your life. And maybe back taxes aren't ruining your life, but did you know 1 in 50 taxpayers have an issue with the IRS? Will you help me on my personal mission to fill the tax literacy gap and share this out to your social media because you never know who might need it? I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'd like to thank Jim Ray Consulting Services for helping me get this message out to you. I hope you found the information helpful. Did you know 1 in 50 people have a tax problem? Please share this episode with your friends and family because you never know who may need help. Again, thanks for listening. Hey, just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It provides a framework and possible solutions for solving your tax problems, but it is not legally binding. Please consult your tax professional regarding your specific tax situation.